Hi, my name is Adam Stephensen and I'm a Solution Architect at SSW. Welcome to my Dev Superpower on continuous deployment with Windows, Azure and Visual Studio Online. The goal of this session is to show you how easy it can be to create a website and configure continuous deployment to test, staging and production websites. I set up continuous deployment on the very first day of every single project. The reason is that it lets me get fast feedback. Whenever any of the devs on the project checking code, the code is compiled, the unit tests run, and the code is deployed to a test server. If the code doesn't compile or a unit test fails, all the developers are notified immediately. We also give the product owner and testers a link to the test server so they can give us feedback on the features that we've completed literally minutes after we've checked them in. Once we're happy with the code in the test environment, we can click a button and have that code deployed to our staging environment. And once we're happy with it on staging, we can click a button and off it goes to production. I'm going to show you how to set all of this up in the next half hour or so. Now let's have a look at the different pieces that we're going to be working with. We're going to be using Microsoft Azure websites. We love them. They're incredibly versatile. We use them for everything as simple as free WordPress blogs that you can get set up in 2 minutes, to massive, highly complex sites with background tasks and automatic scaling. What's great is if you want to get in and have a play with Azure, you get 10 free websites when you sign up. So we're just going to use a couple of those today. The other piece of the puzzle is Visual Studio Online. Visual Studio Online is all the power of TFS, but hosted in Azure. You get source control, work item management, testing, telemetry, build. It's the full application lifecycle management suite, and it's free for teams of up to 5 users. What's even cooler is that TFS source control now supports Git. I love Git. The main reason is that I can commit small chunks of code frequently to a local repository, to a local source control server, and then I just push it up to the source control server on Visual Studio Online once it's a workable amount that I want to share with everyone. Why this is great is, I'm an old-time gamer, so I used to love first-person shooters, and I'd run around and I'd do some cool stuff. I'd kill a few bad guys, and then I'd do something cool and I'd kill a boss. The first thing I'd do is save, so that if I did anything stupid, I could just go back to that point really easily. And it's the same thing with distributed source control. So whenever I do something cool, so I try and every 25 minutes, I try and commit locally. And then once I've got a workable, a few nice commits that I want to share with everybody, then I'll actually push those commits up to the server, and then they're available for everyone to use. So what do we want our continuous deployment pipeline to look like? So what we want to happen is that we're going to have multiple developers. They're going to be checking their source code into source control. And whenever they check in code, we want that to automatically push out to our test websites. At least one test website. Sometimes we'll have multiple. We might have test websites dedicated for UAT or performance, but we're just going to work with one today. Once we're happy with it on the test website, we want to be very easily able to just push the stable version of our code out to our staging website. And then once we're happy with it on staging, we want to be able to push it out to production. So the steps for that is we're going to go onto visualstudio.com and we're going to create a new team project. Once we've created that team project, we're going to pull it down onto our local workstation. That's called cloning the first time that we clone it locally. Then we're going to put just a simple website into that local repository, and then we're going to push that change back into Visual Studio Online. Then what we're going to do is we're going to configure continuous deployment to easily push that out to the test website. Let's see how easy that is. So to start with, we're going to go to Visual Studio Online. We're going to go create a new team project. We're going to call it Northwind.Music Store. We're going to use the Scrum template and we're going to say, let's use Git. I'm going to create that project. Okay, so that's creating the team project up on visualstudio.com. So that obviously has all of the work item tracking and everything associated with it, but we're not going to look at that today. We're just going to focus on source control and continuous deployment. Now, once that team project has been created, I'm going to jump into Visual Studio. And in Visual Studio, I'm going to go into Team Explorer. I'm going to go up to Connect. And once I'm in Connect, I'm going to go select Team Projects. And now that I'm in here, I'm going to come in and I'm going to choose the one that I just created, Northwind.Music Store, and I'm going to hit Create. Connect. So now I've connected to that team project up on the server, but I actually don't have an instance of that locally. So I'm going to come in here in Northwind.Music Store. When I double click on it, say I can clone that locally. So I'm going to clone that repository down onto my local machine. So that's taking the source code repository off the server, even though it's empty, and I'm going to make a clone of it on my local machine. Now, once I've cloned it locally, I want to put a website into it. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to say New. I'm going to choose an ASP.NET web application. I'm just going to call it Northwind.Music Store web UI. Okay, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to say MVC. We always add some unit tests. I'm going to hit OK. So that's just going to create a couple of projects in that solution. Okay, so this is all happening locally. So the next step is once it's created those projects, I want to commit those projects to my local source control repository. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to come up here into underneath Team Explorer. I can see there's a number of different options here, so I'm going to go into Changes, and it'll show me all of the different files that have changed. So obviously we've just added a new project, so there's going to be a whole lot of files being added there. So I'm going to give it a reason, and I'm going to say initialize solution. Now I'm going to hit commit. Now what commit does is it just makes it, it's like doing a local check-in. So it's committing to my local source control repository. So now I've committed that locally. Okay, and it's telling me you've committed locally, but you need to sync to share the changes with the server. So I can click on sync here, or I could go back up into Home in Team Explorer and go into unsync commits. And this is where I could actually wait till it committed a few times. So I could go in here and I could go in and I could open up the home page. And I could come in here and I could say ASP.NET rocks. Okay, and I could do another commit locally. Okay, or if I wanted to, I could say, oh, I've made mistakes there, and I could roll back that commit, and it would take me back to the last time I committed. But let's jump back into Team Explorer, and I'll just do another commit. So I'm going to go up into Home, Changes, Updated Title. Okay, so now you can see I've made 2 commits locally. So now I'm going to go into my unsync commits, and I'm going to, I could just push them straight up, but you should always do a pull to pull everybody else's changes before you do a push. So I could do a pull and then a push, or Visual Studio very kindly has a sync button, and what the sync button does is just does a pull and then a push. So I'm going to do a sync. Okay, now so it's giving me an error here, and even though the error isn't very descriptive, I know what I did. So I forgot to, when I cloned locally, what it did was it made a new local, it created this branch locally, but it didn't publish it. So that's a good tip. So what I need to do is after I've cloned, so this is a good tip, is that after I've cloned locally, I need to come in here and find my branch, right click on it and publish it. So it's actually publishing that branch up to the server. Now that will actually push the branch up and it's also push those commits up. So I don't need to go and do a sync. But now all of those code changes are up in Visual Studio Online. So I could go into Visual Studio Online, go into code and into commits, and I'd see that those commits have been pushed up to the server. Now what hasn't happened, remember, so I created the team project, I cloned it locally, and then I published the branch. But you know, it's the same. Once I publish the branch, I've really pushed those commits back up to Visual Studio Online. So what I haven't set up yet is the Azure website or the continuous deployment. So let's do that next. So I'm just going to jump. I could use the nice new Azure portal at portal.azure.com, which looks very nice, but unfortunately there's still some issues with it, with working with continuous deployment. So I'm going to go back into the old portal at manage.windowsazure.com. I'm going to come in here, I'm going to say underneath the website section, I'm going to say create me a new website. I'm just going to do a quick create, and I'm going to call it Northwind Test. I can choose the region. If I wanted to, I could go and actually set it up to deploy to Australia. Now that we have servers in Australia, which is pretty cool. So it's going through and it's now creating the test site for Northwind. Now, that's pretty quick. So now that that's created, I can just jump in, and on the first tab, I can just choose Set Up Deployment from Source Control. There's a number of different options from where I can get the source from. I can set up source control, continuous deployment from, but we're going to use Visual Studio Online. My mouse is going a bit funny. Okay, disable my mouse. Okay, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say use adamstephensen.visualstudio.com. So this is, I'm telling the Azure website where to get the code from. So I'm saying get it from my Visual Studio Online account. It's now going to give me a list of the team projects that I've made or the repositories that are available. And I'm going to choose northwind.musicstore. And it's now linking this website, Northwind Test, to this source control repository. Okay, now how it's actually doing that is it's actually creating a build. So once this is finished creating, if we go back into Team Explorer and go Home and Builds, what it's actually doing is it's actually creating a build in here. There we can see Northwind Test. Now I'm a little suspicious that there's a cross on that build. Okay, so it's disabled, so something isn't quite right in there. Now I know what this is going to be also, but I thought it was worthwhile pointing out. So if I come in here and have a look at process, we're probably going to find that the item to build isn't filled in, and the reason for that is going to be that sometimes the solution file is excluded. So if I go into changes and I have a look in untracked files, I think this is only new, but yes, for some reason it hasn't included the solution file in my changes that should be committed. So this actually isn't getting pushed up to Visual Studio Online. Added solution file. So I'm not sure whether that's a bug, because it didn't used to do that. So I've committed that locally. I'm going to sync that, Okay, once that's synced, that's actually pushing that up. I'm now going to go in here and I'm going to tell the build to build the solution file. Okay, so what should have happened is that should have all just, if I'd have checked and included that solution file at the beginning, I wouldn't have had to edit that build definition. But so what's happened is now I've got a build definition, and the build definition is saying to build the solution and then to deploy it up to that website. So if I was to make another change now that I've enabled continuous deployment, what it will actually do is it will actually, after I do the commit, so if I jump back into index and I put a full stop in after .NET Rocks, if I go and commit that, okay, when I commit that and sync it, okay, we'll see that go. Once that's gone up, if I go into Team Explorer and have a look at the builds, you'll see that I've got my build definition down here, but it's actually created, it's now kicked off a build. Okay, and these builds are actually going to build a solution on the server and then deploy them to the website. Okay, so just to recap, we created the team project, we cloned it locally, we added the solution, and we pushed the changes up to visualstudio.com. We then created the website on Azure and configured continuous deployment from visualstudio.com. Now, we had to go in there and make a few changes to the solution, but if you just check to make sure that the solution file is included, you won't have to do that. Okay, so that'll be now deploying off to that website, which we'll come back to and check in a minute. We can come in here and we can see on the portal, you can see that that's now finished deploying. So I'm in the visualstudio.com website page. If I hit browse, okay, you can see it's going to open up the website we created, and it's actually going to have the content that we pushed up from Visual Studio. There we go. You can see it doesn't have the full stop yet. The reason for that is that there's actually a couple of builds going on. So that's the first build that's gone through. You can see that if this refreshes, there we go. So that one's been finished and deployed, but the one with the full stop is still queued, so that one's still on the way up. So what we've got now is we've now configured continuous deployment to a test environment. So can we just do the same thing and point it to production websites? No, because what if a customer comes in and to report a bug to the production website? If we've been writing code and checking it into our master branch for the last 2 weeks, we've got a whole lot of untested, not production ready code in there. So how do we fix the critical bug immediately? What we're going to do is we're going to create a new branch. We're going to create a release branch. And once we're finished testing once we've got a stable version in the test environment, we're then going to push those changes to the release branch. So we're going to create a release branch locally, and we're going to push that up to Visual Studio Online. Once we're there, we're going to create 2 websites, a staging website and a production website. And we're going to set it up so that whenever we push our code up into our release repository, it's going to automatically deploy to staging. And then when we're happy and we've tested on staging, then we can just very easily kick off a build that will then deploy it to production. Okay, so let's jump in and we're going to create the staging and production websites. So we're just going to go in here, we're going to go new, website, quick create, staging, oops, Northwind staging. So we've created the Northwind staging and we're going to create another one called Northwind production. Okay, so we've created the two websites. But now down in visualstudio.com, in Visual Studio, we're going to go into the branches tab. So we've got our master branch, which remember is this branch over on the left that we're going to be working in and that's deploying to our test environment. We're just going to create a release branch. So we're going to come in here and we're going to say create a new branch, base it on master and call it release. Okay, now that I've created the release branch, see how it's unpublished? I'm going to publish that branch. Okay, so that's publishing it from my local repository up to TFS, up to Visual Studio Online. What I can do now is I can jump up, I can grab my staging website, and I can set up deployment from source control. And the same as I did with the test site, I'm just selecting the repository to get it from. And then I'll repeat exactly the same process with the production website. Okay, the other way to set, so there's another link. You can also set up deployment from source control by going to the dashboard tab and clicking on this link on the right. Set up deployment from source control from Stephensen.visualstudio.com. Now, the trouble that we had with the test website and having to go and edit the build definition, we won't have because we resolved that issue by making sure the solution file was included and not excluded. Okay, so we've now set up deployment from source control for test, staging, and production. But the way we've set it up is that by default, test, staging, and production are all pulling their source, are all getting their source. They're both currently wired up to get their source from origin master. So what we need to do is we need to come in, we need to go into these build, we need to go into the build definitions, and you can see it's created the build definitions for staging and production. So I'm going to come into staging and I'm going to edit the build definition. And what I'm going to do is on the source settings, I can come in here and choose which branch to use. So I'm going to come in here, hit on the drop down and change it to use the release branch. So I've done that for staging. Now I'll do the same thing for production. Okay, so now if I was to kick off a build, there's one more change I need to make. Is remember I said that I want whenever I check in code and push it to my release repository, I want it to automatically deploy to the staging environment, but I want to manually be able to choose when to kick it off to deploy to production. So to do that in my build definitions, in the staging build definition, I'll make sure the trigger is continuous, because the continuous integration trigger means whenever new source code is checked in, automatically kick off the build. But in the production build, I'm going to change the trigger back to manual so that I have to manually kick that off. And that's our full configuration for continuous deployment to a test, staging, and production environment. Let's do a run through from start to end on what that development workflow would look like. So if I jump into my index, if I jump into my file, I say, wow, .NET rocks. Okay, so I've made an important change. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to commit that change locally. Okay, making sure I'm committing to the master branch. I'm going to say update the title. Okay, so I'm going to commit that change to the master branch. What I can also do, just to show you one more thing, if I made another change, okay, I'll just add a few more exclamation marks. So I haven't synced yet. I've made one local commit. Now I'm going to go back into Team Explorer. What I could do now is, if I was ready to commit, I could go update the title again, and rather than just choosing commit, so I could hit commit and then sync, or I could hit commit and then go to the unsynced commit tab and choose sync or push, but I can also just go in here and say commit and sync. Okay, so now it's committed it and it's doing the syncing. So it's pushing these commits up to origin master. And because we've configured continuous deployment, it's then also going to deploy those changes off to my test website. Now let's say my testers go in, they check it all out, and they come back to me and they say, hey, those changes are great, let's deploy them to staging. All I need to do is jump back into Visual Studio, and I just need to go into branches, and I need to say, let's merge those changes we've made to master to release. So now I hit merge, okay, and now in my unsynced commits tab, it's saying here are the changes that have been made to the master tab that haven't been pushed to release yet. When I say push to these, what's happening is it's pushing these out to the release branch, and it's going to be pushing those changes off to the staging environment. Let's just jump into our website and just have a bit of a look at the deployments that are going on here, so we can have a look. So we can see there's this, actually we'll have a look in, let's have a look in the builds tab. So in Team Explorer, I can go home and I can go to builds, and I can see that I kicked off the test, because remember I pushed to that one first, so that one's running, and then we've also got the deployment to staging going through at the moment. You can see it hasn't pushed, it's not going to push out to production. So then once it's pushed out to staging, we'd go and inspect it on staging, and once we were happy, we might go back and we might make more changes to test and push those through to staging. But once we get staging to a point where we're happy with it, we just go in here into production, right click, and queue a new build, and hit queue. And what that's doing is that's queuing the build that's going to push from our release branch to our production website. So just as a bit of a recap on what we've covered, we created a team project, we cloned it locally, we added a website, we pushed that up back into visualstudio.com, and that deployed to our test website. We then created a release branch, we published that, and then we configured staging and release websites to have continuous integration from that release branch. I hope this has given you a great insight onto how easy it can be to set up test, staging and production websites using Visual Studio Online and and Windows Azure. There's a few things that we haven't covered. We didn't have a look at unit tests and functional tests that run automatically when you check in code. We also didn't have a look at using a tool like SQL Deploy or Code First Migrations to automatically update your database schema when you deploy. And for teams running more complex requirements or aren't using Azure, we'd also suggest that they check out a tool like Octopus Deploy or Microsoft Release Manager. But this is a great introduction. This is a great way to get your hands into continuous deployment and to start getting really rapid feedback. So I hope you've enjoyed today's Dev Superpower, and please give me lots of feedback and let me know what other Dev Superpowers you'd like to see. So thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon.